Welcome back to I Can Science That. This summer is almost over, and that means I'm going to have to spend less time with YouTube going forward. So let me do a little bit of a channel status update here. Got a lot still going on, and hopefully I will be able to trickle it out throughout the fall. What's going on? The aerospace crash course. I've started on a video about what it means to trim the aircraft, and in the equations and the design of the aircraft, what that means and how we make that work. I want to get back to the critical quickies because there's several more concepts that I think deserve a little attention there. And lots of other topics that I think are worth talking about. If you've got a favorite topic, something you want to see addressed, send it my way, throw it down in the comments, and I'll see if I can get to those. I did notice another mention from Globebusters. So this is going to have to suffice as my response video. My response is that I am willing to talk to you. I don't do debate. I'm not interested in another dumpster fire type of shouting match. Not interesting to me. If you want to do a discussion, though, I think we can totally do that. I would be happy to go on your channel or to have you come on my channel and talk about that. In specific, I'm responding to your mention of my Globe Earth and Flat Earth evidence videos. I have 2 videos out there. Now, I don't consider this my evidence. These are videos where I have asked the audience to provide the evidence. So if you find that the Flat Earth evidence seems very thin, I will agree with you there, but that's not my fault. At least not directly. I would suggest that it is probably largely due to the fact that I have a very small flat earth following on my channel, and therefore there hasn't been as much engagement from the flat earthers. And I will also say that what engagement I do get from the flat earthers is largely hostile, and that's not conducive to an objective a logical assessment of evidence. So please, if you have some evidence for flat earth, or you want to make a logical rebuttal against some of the globe earth evidence, please do come and comment and contribute. Your contributions are absolutely welcome as long as they are civil and reasonably logical, right? We can have a discussion about that. The last thing I want to bring up tonight is this article that somebody sent to me today that I really enjoyed. I highly recommend it. I'm going to link it down in the comments for you. This is an interview with social scientist Michael Bang Petersen on why people believe outrageous lies. Now, this is political commentary, but I found interesting parallels that this audience might get a little revved up about. Now, because Dr. Petersen makes claims that align with my preconceived biases, I am going to share them with you without vetting any of it. Just kidding! Petersen is a Danish professor of political science, and he does research in the area of political psychology. Now, this article is an interview with him, and I will go through that. I will also put down in the description there a link to this article, which is actually an excerpt. It's a chapter from a book, and it is called The Evolutionary Psychology of Conflict and the Functions of Falsehood by Petersen, Osmundsen, and Tooby. And yeah, you can read the whole thing. Let me summarize for you some of the interesting parts, and I'll do it using the more accessible interview format. Let me start with just what is this about? The interview is about the spread of political misinformation, and Petersen is going to talk about whether that is in fact part of the human condition. Petersen goes on to explain their methodology as evolutionary psychology. Now, what does that mean? That means thinking about modern psychology in terms of whether it was advantageous to an early human development situation. So the theory being that any behavior that is advantageous to the success of the humans in early life would have been selected for, and so those behaviors are the behaviors that would become natural in humans. So that's the idea. And if you're asking, is that real science? No, we're not going to do experiments. This is educated people who have read all of the source material on this. These are anthropologists and psychologists, and they will be discussing what they think are likely triggers for these kinds of behaviors, and then the idea being that opens the door to more rigorous research down the line. So in a nutshell, what that means is Petersen thinks these seem like really plausible ideas, and they do happen to align with some ideas that I think are very plausible as well. And I think that maybe we can apply these same ideas into some of our, intergroup conflicts that we have here in this community. And again, I will link this article down there. I recommend you read it. It's not very long. Read the interview at least, and then if you find that interesting, go and read that entire chapter from the book. Let me just read one passage from here that I really enjoyed. Humans are constantly focused on signs of loyalty. Are they loyal members of the group? And how can I signal that I'm a loyal member? There are all sorts of ways in which we do that. We take on particular clothes, we have gang tattoos, and all sorts of physical ways of expressing loyalty with the group. But because we humans are exceptionally complex, another way to signal our loyalty is through the beliefs that we hold. We can signal loyalty to a group by having a certain set of beliefs. And then the question is, well, what is the type of belief through which we can signal that we belong? First of all, it should be a belief that other people are not likely to have. Because if everyone has this belief, then it's not a very good signal of group loyalty. It needs to be something that other people in other groups do not have. The basic logic at work here is that anyone can believe the truth, but only loyal members of the group can believe something that is blatantly false. Okay, I think that's really an interesting twist to it. If I want to signal my membership in a group, one way to do that is to outwardly express beliefs that align with that group. I think that's pretty straightforward. Now, if those beliefs are also shared by every other group, then that doesn't signal anything. That is not effective. So if we need an effective way to signal group membership, it has to be unique to that group. And the author suggests here now that means something that is untrue but is believed by that group is an effective signal now. One way to come out and say, I am part of that group, is to repeat their beliefs when their beliefs are not true. I will say, if you read the full book that I link, he explains what true means to him in this context, and it means simply that the truth of that statement cannot be determined or has not been determined. Okay, so doesn't necessarily mean that it is absolutely false. Although here he does say, he does suggest that something that is blatantly false, as in something that you can prove is not true, and yet you still profess to believe it, would be an excellent marker of group membership. So what else we got here? There is a selection pressure to develop beliefs or develop a psychology that scans for beliefs that are so bizarre and extraordinary that no one would come up with them by themselves. This would signal, well, I belong to this group. I know what this group is about. I have been with this group for a long time, because you would not be able to hold this belief without that prehistory. So I think that is very intriguing within our our community, where here we are with Globers and Flat Earthers butting heads at constant conflict from it's an in-group, out-group situation. That is what I have observed very strongly. As I mentioned before, I have very few Flat Earth contributors here, and those that I do get tend to be very hostile. As an example of just what I'm talking about with this confrontational nature, if there are any Flat Earth believers out there watching this right now, how many of you think that I just said you hold false beliefs? How many of you think that I am accusing you and your group of believing something that is blatantly false? Isn't that what I'm saying? Is that what I just said? Or did I just say that in this conflict, it's evident that one of the sides is not the truth? And I haven't actually said which side is not the truth. I didn't accuse you of being on the false side at all. But coming from me, an admitted Glober, obviously it would be your presumption that I'm calling you the false side, right? So I'm trying my best to get away from that and talk about the things that we can agree on, which is we agree that we don't agree. We agree it cannot be both. So one side or the other is professing beliefs that are blatantly false. I think we can agree to that. So, so this way of thinking gives us an insight into that. Maybe the human mind is pre-wired to think in that way. Maybe there's something about our psychology that once we want to, something in our minds wants to belong, that we feel very strongly about holding the beliefs and advertising the beliefs of the group we want to belong to. And maybe there's something about the need to belong that allows our brains to accept a belief that our rational minds would probably reject. A rational mind maybe would say, there's no way that would be true, but there's something else going on in here. Our need to belong can override that because it's more important to have the backing of our group than it is to simply believe things that are true. Here's another really good insight. A good way to signal that I'm loyal to this group and not to that group is to take on a belief that is the exact opposite of what the other group believes. So that creates pressure not only to develop bizarre beliefs, but also bizarre beliefs that this other group is bad, is evil, or something really opposed to the particular values that they have. So what does that mean? That means if I want to belong to a group, I will accept their beliefs, even if those beliefs are bizarre, and I will directly reject any beliefs of the other side. So let's talk about how this manifests in the globe versus flat discussion. Quick tangent here. I'm using the word belief fairly frequently in this video, as has the original author that I have been reading from. Now, when that author uses the word belief, they're using a particular definition of belief, and it's the same one that I am repeating as I am, in fact, reading his article to you. I point this out simply because a fairly new commenter on some of my videos has expressed very strong opinions about the definition of the word belief. And I want to stress that I'm not making some kind of semantic argument here. If you've watched my videos, you know that I don't like semantic arguments. I stress that words have multiple definitions. So semantic arguments are not useful. Case in point, the word belief, the very first definition that comes up is simply an acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists. That makes no claims whatsoever about the evidence behind that belief. There could be evidence, there could be no evidence. A belief does not imply whether there is evidence or not. Belief does not imply whether the thing is true or not. It doesn't. That's not what that means. And so, if you want to use a different definition, we could dig and find your definition. Where there are other definitions. Some of them say that belief implies you do not have evidence. You only believe it without evidence. And that is not how the author is using that word here. So I'd appreciate it if we don't turn this into a semantic argument about whether belief is justified or not. In this video, the word belief is used merely to mean the acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists. Nothing more. On my channel, you'll find another video, this one here, I'll link it up there, and it's called How Do You Think the Atmosphere Works? This was my attempt to begin a dialogue in a very non-confrontational way with globe skeptics or space skeptics who are repeating the idea that the atmosphere that we live in cannot exist next to the vacuum of space. So that is the belief being professed by that group, is that the atmosphere cannot exist next to the vacuum of space. My take on that is that that conclusion is not logical. So I'd like to have a non-confrontational, objective discussion where we discuss the logic of this statement. And we break it down and we look at what is objectively true. This is one of those rare things that we can definitely do that. We can look and see, and we should be able to come to agreement using nothing more than logic and observations that we all agree to. We all agree to the observations, and we should agree to the logical steps. We should agree to the same conclusion. And yet, although this video has been up since February of 2019, I have not managed to accomplish that yet with any flat earth believer. I have gotten very few responses to it, possibly just I'm not well known enough and there aren't enough people who really are interested in talking to me about this. Within the comment threads of this video, the closest I have gotten to closing that gap of logic was when Rachie came by and offered her answers to my 10 questions. And here they are. Rachie suggests that at sea level, the standard pressure would be 14.7 psi, and at the top of Mount Everest, for example, she's got a guess of around 5 psi. Okay, and that's good, and we don't have to nitpick about the rest of this stuff. And so, based on those responses, I did this response, which I think breaks down the logic of the question very well. Let's do the logic together now. Number one, the pressure decreases with altitude. I think we should agree on that one. There are still a few, occasionally I hear people who will profess that they do not agree with that statement, but Rachie does, and I think many people would agree that this is definitely the case. It starts from 14.7 psi or so down around the ocean, and then drops to 5 psi or so up at the tallest mountain. This is what happens here in our real world, and this is important here, we agree this is a true fact. This is not a fact in dispute. If you want to dispute it, that's a separate conversation. Please, by all means, drop by. I would invite you to please come to this video and comment on it, and we can discuss. Okay, but Rachie agrees with this statement. I agree with this statement, and I think most, even flat earthers, agree with this statement. Okay, point number two, there are no containers or physical barriers between the ocean and the mountaintop that would prevent gas from moving freely between them. I think we can definitely agree to that. Whether you think there may be a barrier up high or not, we can agree that there are no barriers between the top of Mount Everest and the ocean. No barriers there of the type that are going to seal the pressure differential, right? As the mountain climbers climb up that mountain, they don't break through a barrier, and that's why they encounter this 5 psi. That isn't what happened. I think we can agree on this. We should agree this is a true fact. There are no barriers of that type from the ocean to the mountaintop. Okay, pressure definitely drops with altitude. Pressure drops with altitude with no barriers. These are two undisputed facts. Okay, so from those two facts, we can conclude that gas pressure can, and in fact does, vary from one place to another without the need of any containers or barriers. It is not disputed that the pressure varies from one altitude to another. Assuming that is not disputed, you may dispute it individually, in which case that's a separate conversation. If you agree that there is a pressure difference of some kind, some pressure differential from one place to another place, and there is no physical barrier anywhere between those two boundaries, then pressure varies without a container. That is a logical conclusion. So again, I invite anyone who is a flat earther, who holds this belief or has heard this belief or is curious about this belief that space cannot exist because vacuum can't exist next to an atmosphere. You've heard that. It's very often repeated. I would like to at least get agreement from someone that this statement is correct, that certainly the pressure of the air that we are breathing now does vary from one location to another without any barriers. But so far, I have had zero. In the 2 years this video has been up, I've had 0 flat earthers acknowledge that simple, logical statement. And I wonder, I ask, what do you think? Do you think maybe the reason that flat earthers don't acknowledge this statement is because there is perhaps a strong motivation to disagree with me because I am a glober. I am part of the out group. I am the enemy, if it were. I'm the antagonist. And because of that, there's a strong motivation to automatically disagree with me regardless of the truth or falsehood of my statements. Do you think that could be? Do you think that could be a motivating factor there? Do you think your own repetition, if you are someone who has ever repeated that claim that pressure cannot, if you don't put a barrier there, the pressure will immediately equalize, and that's proof, right? If you've repeated that statement, then do you think maybe something motivating you to repeat that statement is coming from your belonging to a group and has somehow maybe diverted your attention away from the truth or falsehood of the statement? So that's the question I put to you. And please, please, if you have something to contribute in a positive way, I'd love for you to come on by and talk to me about this logic, which I feel is infallible, and yet I think so many of you disagree with it. So if you want to just come and shout at me, just keep that to yourself. But if you'd like to come and talk about where I have made a logical error, we can do that. We can have that discussion. But it's going to require first that we drop the walls of in-group, out-group, and instead step back and just consider what evidence do we actually have and what logical conclusions can we draw from that. So thank you very much. Hopefully I'll see you down in the comments with your thoughts about gas pressure, containers, and more importantly, whether our belief systems could be somehow motivated by our association with different groups.